lecture series and our 12th lecture in total. Thank you all for coming. My name is John Carlton, and I'm the organizer of the Frankfort Heritage Week Coalition and the co-organizer of this lecture series. As always, I want to give a big thanks to Paul Sawyer Public Library for hosting us, and to my co-organizer, Diane Dahoney, for everything she and her staff do for these lectures and the community. And many thanks to the Frankfort Plant Board and Cable 10 for taping these lectures and hosting them on their YouTube channel, and to the State Journal for always giving us great additional publicity. I want to remind everyone that you can find flyers with the full season printed in the back, and you can find the schedule on the library's website and videos of past lectures on Cable 10's YouTube channel. We've also added another pop-up lecture for Tuesday, December 17th at 6 p.m. Historian Dr. Daniel Gifford will present on his new book, Benefactors of Posterity, the founding era of the Filson Historical Society, 1884 to 1899. Dr. Gifford is also a board member of the Filson. This will be the first of two lectures on the history of the Filson Historical Society, one of Kentucky's two state historical societies, one private and the other public, both of which have origin connections to Frankfort and to each other. So I hope you'll come learn about the Filson and the history of telling Kentucky's story. For today's lecture, we're headed back to Leestown, the first settlement in the area we now call Frankfort, and next year, Leestown will celebrate the 250th anniversary of its settlement in 1775. Today, the area of Leestown is primarily occupied by Buffalo Trace Distillery, one of the most iconic, historic, and respected bourbon distilleries in the world, and one of Frankfort's crown jewels for history, hospitality, and tourism. As Dr. Richard Taylor told us during his presentation, the first mention of whiskey in the area was in the journal of explorer Nicholas Creswell, who in 1775 came upon Hancock Lee, Leestown's founder, camped at the mouth of the Elkhorn Creek and the Kentucky River. Hancock Lee gave Creswell a sip of his whiskey, probably produced elsewhere in the east of Virginia, and Creswell documented that in his journal. Just a few weeks later, Hancock and Willis Lee would visit the site of Leestown to begin establishing their settlement. The next year, in 1776, explorer James Herod would mention in his journal the word distilling for the first time in Kentucky, in reference to his community's plans to build a distillery of whiskey at Harrodsburg. Though people in the area of Franklin County, like Harrison Blanton, are speculated to have been producing whiskey long before, and though Leestown had already served as a military and industry trade site for tobacco, whiskey, and other goods, the first documented distillery on the site of Leestown was built in 1856 by Daniel Swigert, the son of Jacob Swigert and nephew of Frankfort's first mayor, Philip Swigert. The Swigert brothers had just sold Daniel the land containing Stony Point, where this distillery was later built. Interestingly, it is after Jacob that Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. named one of his sons Jacob Swigert Taylor. Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr. would later purchase this distillery in 1870, setting the stage for the distillery we know today. Many of the early bourbon pioneers, such as Elijah Craig, widely considered the father of bourbon, were also enslavers of people. Tragically, countless stories of many of those people and their emancipated descendants, as well as their contributions to the bourbon history, have been lost to time. And just as the history of Black Americans and their contributions to the horse industry is only beginning to get the public and scholarly recognition they deserve, so too the story of Black Americans and their long involvement in the bourbon industry is only beginning to be told. And so it is in this spirit of telling the story of all of those who have left footprints in bourbon history that we invited our speaker, one of Frankfort's treasured community members, here today to document the story of his life and his family at what is now Buffalo Trace Distillery. So without further ado, please welcome Diane Dahoney, Community Service Librarian with Paul Sawyer Public Library, to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, John. Thank you all so much. Thank you for bearing with us during our technical difficulties. I promise you it will be worth it. On behalf of the library, as John said, I'm Diane Dahoney, the Community Service Librarian here at Paul Sawyer. On behalf of the library, we just want to welcome you all out. Glad to have you spending your Saturday afternoon with us. It is my distinct honor to introduce this gentleman today. I feel like he probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to do my very best, okay? So Freddie Johnson is a third-generation employee at Buffalo Trace Distillery and serves as its Distillery VIP Visitor Lead. That's fancy. Born in Paris, Kentucky, which of course is Bourbon County, he spent some of his early childhood summers in the mountains of Breathitt County, with his maternal grandfather, who was a coal miner and a friend to the moonshiners. The family moved to Frankfort when he was 5. Freddie enjoyed hunting, fishing, and hanging out with his paternal grandfather, Jimmy Johnson Sr., and his father, Jimmy Johnson Jr., at what is now known as Buffalo Trace Distillery. He was in the middle of a successful career as a network operations engineer in Atlanta, Georgia, when he put all of that aside to fulfill a promise he made to his father, Jimmy, more than 20 years earlier. He had promised him that he would work at the distillery during his lifetime so they could say that they had 3 generations of the Johnson family that worked at Buffalo Trace. Freddie took an early retirement and moved back to care for his father and brother. Jimmy got him a job as a tour guide at the distillery in 2002, but Freddie has been in and around the distillery since he was 5 years old. Freddie weaves together his childhood memories with the distillery's rich history as he entertains thousands each year in his various tours around Buffalo Trace. He'll be telling us a little bit about that today. One of the distillery's most popular and highly sought after tour guides, Freddie is the recipient of the 2015 Rose, which is the Recognition of Service Excellence Award, the 2017 Lexington Hospitality Award, and he was inducted into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame in 2018. Please help me to welcome today Mr. Freddie Johnson.
Well, that about wraps it up. I want you, let me get this out here, because I want you to take a journey with me. And I hope that you find this journey as fascinating as I have. Because something happened, and it's because of John and Diane that I did a little bit more research on my own family. So we're going to go back in time. We're going to go back to the 17 and 1800s. Thomas Jefferson is now the governor of Virginia. We are all seated in Virginia. It is called Fincastle County, Virginia. Has not yet been developed. So Jefferson starts giving land grants, and a lot of those land grants were actually plantations. So watch how these pieces unfold. Now we all know that here lately, the Thomas Jefferson uncovering of the things that went on at the big house. So bear that in mind and watch how these pieces fit together. So surrounding Buffalo Trace Distillery, there were plantations. And I will read a quote, and I'm going to tell you how these pieces start to fit together. So I'm trying to find out about my own family. So here's what happens. We start doing the research, and the person's name, we called him Colonel West. That was all I knew growing up, was Colonel West. So Colonel Billy West relocated to Kentucky from Virginia in 1835. He brought with him Martha, who was the mother of Carrie and Annie West. The deal was, she went everywhere with him. She was his servant, but he also had fathered a couple of kids by her. But they were a pair. So the way that it worked was, at his death, he bequeathed land to the 2 family members, Carrie and Annie West. And the Johnson's family name gets created because Annie West marries a fellow by the name of Bill Johnson. So there are Johnsons in the Frankfort area that go back in history also. So we've been doing a lot of research on that. The kicker is this. Out of that union, William Johnson and Annie produced 9 children. Lizzie Bell, Katie, Willie, Lonnie, Carrie, John Murray, Maddie, Benny, Mamie, and James Bronner Johnson. The significance of that is that was the start of my family. So as we go back in time, I just want you to just remember this. because all of this started with the buffalo migrating out into this area. That's how it all got started. But the settlers were bringing with them their servants. And when we do a little bit of the timeline of Buffalo Trace Distillery, all of a sudden you begin to get a picture. So while the distillery is being, the foundation for the distillery is being created by the migrating buffalo through the area, the settlers are coming in. The distillery gets started in 1773. What happened was Taylor buys an old distillery and basically redoes it. And the influence of him on the industry, for most people, they know that he was the mayor of Frankfort for 16 years. He was a member of the House, a member of the Senate, but he was an entrepreneur. And he had multiple distilleries around the area. So what happens is he creates the OFC distillery here in Frankfort. And at the same time that that's going on, beginning with the 1800s, Billy West is relocating out here from Virginia. So he starts to basically use the land agriculturally. And at the same time this is going on, something interesting happens. So at the middle of the 1800s, at the same time this migration is taking place, a new whiskey cocktail gets created. It is known as the Sazerac. And the rye whiskey for that cocktail came from right here in this territory. The bartender who made that whiskey cocktail back in that period of time was a fellow by the name of Thomas Handy. And what he had done was he had replaced cognac and brandy with rye whiskey from this area. And the first whiskey cocktail was created. The cool part about it is, fast forward, Taylor has set the stage, but Taylor has a number of distilleries. So he overextends, and what happens is, George, I'm saying it nicely, so along comes George T. Stagg, and George T. Stagg's family, as they come into the area, a lot of interesting things start to happen around here. So as this is happening, this takes place. This picture is my great-grandfather. The lady to his left, the first lady to his left, is his wife, Melissa Wilson, and that is her mother. And those kids are basically the product of, we called him Papa George, and her nickname was Mud, okay? But her real name was Melissa Graham. However, look at her. Now, as a kid, I can tell you this. I did not know too much about her, other than she was ugly and she was mean. And I was bad as a kid, so it just wasn't a fond memory at all. But I want you to look down right at the base near her waist. The little girl on the end is my father's mother. It gets better. The house that they're standing in front of is where my father was born. Isn't that crazy? So that house was located right down the road on Glens Creek Road from the Frankfort Distillery. And Papa George was a businessman, but he was also a hustler. And he buried people in the Frankfort Cemetery. And he received a nickel a grave, and he would invest that money, and he basically became a pretty prominent business person because all of this was taking place as the Depression starts to roll in. And at the same time this is going on and he's getting paid a nickel a grave, my dad at this point is probably about 13 to 14 years old. And I tell folks he became the first tour guide in our family, because at the same time this is going on, an interest in Daniel Boone had taken place. And Daniel Boone's grave was buried in the Frankfort Cemetery. And so people would come in there and they couldn't figure out where the grave was, and my father would offer to help them find the grave. And so they would give him a nickel, or they'd give him a little bit of money, and he said sometimes he'd get a quarter. And that was big doings back in the day. He said the unfortunate part was some days he made more money than my great-grandfather did digging graves. So, but it's kind of interesting when you look at Frankfort Cemetery, and I was trying to figure out during the period of time that he was there how many graves he actually dug in that cemetery, because back then they were all done by hand. So it's an amazing thing. Fast forward again, something interesting happens. My grandfather had stumbled upon, this is my dad during the war, but my grandfather had become friends with Colonel Blanton. And it's interesting because Colonel Blanton started here at the age of 16. He was actually a little bit older than my father. And evidently around that period of time, you couldn't work at a distillery until you were 16 years old, apparently. That must be what it is. Because when Granddad turned 16, Colonel Blanton then had him come in, and Colonel Blanton had started an expansion of Buffalo Trace. And they went from 44 buildings to 144 buildings, and at the time, it was the largest distillery in the country. At the same time this is going on, Granddad begins to move through the organization, and he becomes the first African American to be a warehouse manager of a major distillery. So try to imagine keeping up with 250,000 barrels of whiskey on paper ledgers. And at the same time this is going on, the Irish had taken a liking to my granddad, and they'd shown him where to put barrels to produce exceptionally sweet tasting products. And the structure that Colonel Blanton built during Prohibition was Warehouse H, designed to age whiskey faster because it was metal clad, non-insulated. But he was taking advantage of something that E.H. Taylor had done beforehand. E.H. Taylor had discovered that when you have whiskey aging in a barrel, if the temperature of the whiskey inside the barrel reaches 45 degrees or cooler, it stops interacting with the wood. So Taylor had introduced steam heat into the warehouses. Colonel Blanton takes advantage of that, puts steam heat into Warehouse H, and basically he picked up 3 to 4 additional months of aging each year because the whiskey never went dormant. And it produced a very light, fruity, very flavorful whiskey, but it was known as the single barrel product because he would pull these honey barrels out and he would use those to wine and dine and entertain folks in the industry. I guess you already know that we never closed down at any point. Prohibition, Depression, 37 flood, we're still making hooch. We made whiskey for military purposes, so if you've ever heard of Three Feathers, that was one that came out of here, which takes us into the next piece. The war comes along, and my dad was now employed at the distillery. So Granddad started here in 1912. My dad comes in 1936, right before the flood hits in 1937. The war breaks out, World War II breaks out. The distillery supported the war effort in a number of ways. If you take a tour of the distillery, we call it the hard hat tour, or a behind the scenes tour, and we take you back, and you'll notice that we actually were drying the mash, processing it, and it was becoming livestock feed. So we were taking corn and grain from the farmers, making whiskey with it, because there are 3 byproducts. The head is your industrial antiseptic. That's how distillers had so much hand sanitizer during COVID. It's because all these distillers were already making it anyway. So the head, industrial antiseptic, the heart, you drink, and the tail is what you put in your gas tank, ethanol alcohol. So that was used for hardening the rubber in the tires of the Jeeps and gaskets for the tanks, all that. So we were linked directly in with the government, and by processing the grain, it went right back to the farmers so that their livestock was not without food. So it became a continuous circle. We were kind of proud of that. So Dad discovers that he is now in the Air Corps. And it was not until years later that we were having, it was called the oral history documentation that was done by Joanna Hay for the University of Kentucky. And during that conversation at one of our sessions, my dad made a comment about where he was during the war. Elmer T. Lee makes a comment about where he was during the war. And Dad says, well, wait a minute. He says, well, we were building landing strips on such and such and such. Elmer said, yeah. He said, it was our planes landing on those landing strips during the war. And so Dad was like, once they get to drinking, conversations come up. So Dad said, well, let me just tell you something. He said, we would see you, so they had 2 airstrips. One was a dummy airstrip that they would keep lit up and the enemy would bomb it all the time and just tear it all to pieces. And the other one was kept dark until the mission was completed, and then they would light it up, the planes would come in and land, and they'd turn the lights back off. And Dad said, Elmer said, well, let me tell you something. He says, we would see you coming back in on some of those missions, and the lights were just going right up through the wings of the plane. And we were wondering, how in the world were those things staying afloat? And Elmer said, so were we. So Elmer and Dad, I hear footsteps somewhere. So Elmer and Dad basically start to work at the distillery. Granddad and Colonel Blanton were there for 52 years. Elmer and my dad were there for 47 years. We're going to continue on with this because up next is that little charming fellow. And that is my older brother. I've always not liked to see this picture because I was wondering, how did that affect me? But back in the day, they always dressed little kids like that. Isn't that crazy? So that's the start of my life with my brother. And then fast forward, this is the first home that our family got to live in on our own. This is my dad, that's my mom, my sister, and you can see me looking at my sister, and then that's my brother, my older brother. But the foundation for the house that my father had built, the forms that he used to pour the concrete with were from the box cars at the distillery. So they used to bring the grain in box cars, but the doors were so thick they could actually support concrete. And so he built it, and he built the lower level first, and we lived there for a number of years. And then when he paid that off, then he used that as collateral to go back and get his second loan to build the upstairs on the house. So it's kind of going down memory lane, and all this is happening at the same time the distillery is going through their rapid growth. Fast forward again, this is when I am heading into, this is my freshman year of high school at Franklin County High. Kind of crazy, so it was at this point in my life that my life got changed. I did a lot of stuff with 4-H and with the field service agents, and I created a project that got me international attention. And I ended up over in Washington, D.C. I got to visit the Smithsonian Institute. I got to visit Howard University, and my world changed. I got to see live theatrical performances. The school that I was going to in elementary school was called Rosenwald School, and it's been torn down now. I was disappointed that they didn't put up something that would indicate the significance of it. But Rosenwald School was formerly known as Rosenwald Laboratory School, and it was created by Dr. Rosenwald. And his concept was, you can take inner city kids or rural kids, and culturally, if you expose them to the right environment, they will actually become value added to the communities and to the country. And that was his concept. And trust me, getting that opportunity and getting to experience that and seeing what was outside of Frankfort changed my life. And so I tell people all the time, kids are just kids. And I always like this one with my dad because my dad would always make us do things. And his view was that if, in fact, you are given a task, you are supposed to complete the task, but you're supposed to do it to the best of your ability. And I never ever understood that until I started to work at the distillery. And what happens, this is just fast forwarding, this is just my family. My sister wanted to retake this picture. And it's interesting, we did it, and shortly after that, she actually passed away. But that is the same picture that I started with a little while ago. She wanted us all in the same spot. And now you can see I'm bigger than my brother, which is a major thing because he used to beat me up. And I finally took him out. So, but it's interesting how you look at time and you don't realize what you've experienced in your life until you go back and you start putting the pieces together and you realize that it doesn't just happen overnight. There are little incremental things that happen along the way that keep you going. Fast forward again, we have gone through several million barrels. And the cool part about this is the distillery was averaging 1 million barrels once every 10 years. And at one point when the industry was slow, we only did 1 million barrels. We only did 2,000 barrels for the whole year. For the whole year. Fast forward, we're doing 2,000 barrels a day now. Yes. So the deal is, the significance of this particular picture is, up until the 7 millionth barrel, my father, at 94 years old, had become the only living person to personally handle every one of those barrels. And so he passes away. They wanted to continue the legacy. And I have my grandson with me here today, and that's his hand with my hand, and he has helped me roll out the 7 millionth and the 8 millionth barrel. So I'm a third direct generation associated with my dad, and that is a third generation associated with our family today with the 8 millionth barrel, and that's my daughter. She's sick today, so she wasn't able to be with us. But the legacy does continue. This is where things start to change. So Diane had mentioned that I had gotten the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame induction. And I was just recently there at the Cabin Distillery when they did the induction ceremonies a couple of days ago. The cool part about that is Corky, who was the creator of Peerless, was inducted. And the beauty of what happened was simply this. When, a few years back, this mother comes into the distillery with her son. He's only 18. He's a sophomore at the University of Kentucky. And she says, my son is majoring in engineering, but he doesn't really know what he wants to do. He doesn't know what he wants to focus on. And she said, would you mind just taking him around the distillery? I know I know your background. Would you just take him around and just kind of let him see what this is all about? I said, sure. So we take him around and we look at structural things, we look at biochemical engineering things, we look at all the fermentation, the stills, the whole shebang, right? And they leave. And fast forward a few years later, I'm on a tour, just bumming around, and I decide to go to this distillery. And I'm in the back of the room, and this young kid is up front, and he's talking about making whiskey at Peerless. And this lady up in the front says, if you don't mind me asking, what is your title? And he says, oh, I'm the master distiller. And she says, well, aren't you a little young to be a master distiller? And this little kid smiles and he says, ma'am, at this point, I am the youngest master distiller in the state of Kentucky. And she said, well, how did that come to be? And he says, well, it's the craziest story. He said, I was with my mom. We were coming back from the University of Kentucky, and she said, let's stop by the Buffalo Trace Distillery and let's let you look around. And he says, and I met this tour guide, and it's him! It's him! So he gets all excited, and he shares with me that it planted a seed, and it made him want to become a master distiller. So fast forward, last year, Caleb Kilburn was inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame as the Master Distiller of the Year. And during that process, they were getting ready to take a picture, and Corky and Caleb said, whoa, 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 we want you up here with us. And he says, it's because of you that I decided I wanted to be a distiller. So we plant seeds every day. Fast forward again, this year, what's really kind of cool is what has happened is this year in March, I was inducted into the International Whiskey Hall of Fame. And my picture is now in a castle in Scotland. And the graduation present to my son, to my grandson Osiris, is we've gotten passports, and his graduation present is I'm taking him to Scotland. And as a legacy, I'm going to get him to stand next to the picture, and he can have something that will be his legacy moving forward about something that his papa did that was kind of like what my dad and my granddad did before me. So here we are. This is one of the last pictures of Dad here. It was a special event. At this event, we only have a few pictures of him that are at this point. But of all the gifts I've ever given my dad, keeping a promise and coming back to be with him at Buffalo Trace Distillery has meant more to him and to me and our family than you could ever imagine. So this picture, we were doing another event, and Nicholas is our bourbon archaeologist, and he had found this old picture, and he was talking about Colonel Blanton and how they would look at the barrels and how they would do all this kind of stuff. And I'm like looking at the picture, and I said, that's my granddad. So my granddad is standing next to Colonel Blanton, and they're looking at the barrels. And it's like all of a sudden we're finding that around Frankfort, more and more of these artifacts are actually right here in the community, and we don't even realize the heritage that we actually have before us. Now, here we are. This is kind of like the ultimate. So that's Harlan Whitley. He would be on your right. Mark Brown is next to him. And I'm going to get these names mixed up. But he's also associated with what, the legislature? Somebody? Yep. Says. Yep. All right. So there, myself, Osiris, and you know that other charming young man on the other side. So I will show you. We wonder about: do we touch lives? Do we make a difference? So I'm at the induction for Corky a couple of days ago, and I get a chance to spend some time with the governor. And he looks at me and he smiles and he says, well, how in the heck have you been, Freddie? And I'm like, oh, jeez, this is not good. And I said, I've been fine. He said, well, how is Osiris doing? How's your grandson doing? And I said, this is amazing. So I was supposed to deliver the message to him, and I did, that the governor still remembers him rolling out the barrel, and so it was kind of fun. Fast forward again, here's how these pieces come together. Remember Frankfort. Most people don't realize, they know about the Frankfort Cemetery. Very few people know much about Green Hill Cemetery. The cool part about it is, and this is where Diane and John and Penny people, there's a group, we started doing research. And the documentation was put forward. And the Green Hill Cemetery, where this is taking place, was just put into the National Historic Register. So we now have Buffalo Trace Distillery as a National Historic Landmark, and the Green Hill Cemetery is in there for another reason. So it is one of only 4 sites in North America that recognizes African American soldiers that fought during the Civil War. So what is going on here, I promised my dad that I would take care of the family burials in the cemetery, and I saw all these little divots. And I asked my dad, I said, what's all this about? And he says, well, a lot of these are people who were basically like during the Depression or paupers. They didn't have any money, and so they were allowed to just bring them up here and dig a hole, drop them in the ground. And I was like, really? And I said, well, I said, who are they? He said, well, we have no earthly idea. And I said, well, how many is up here? And he said, we have no earthly idea. So I said, okay. Now at the same time this is going on, Mary Jo Sullivan, all right, she's with the Sheriff's Department. They found out that I'm doing stuff with the cemetery board up here at Green Hill, and she said, I was talking to my mother, and my mother, this is Mary Jo Sullivan, says, my mother said that her mother is buried in that cemetery, and she doesn't have a marker. And so we start this effort, and so what's standing behind them is that marker is dedicated to all the paupers that are buried in that cemetery. So we did a big fundraising. We had the military come out. We did a pretty cool thing. That started it. And then fast forward, Freddie's Soda comes along. And the way Freddie's Soda works is $1 out of every case. I don't derive any money from it. $1 out of every case goes to a 501c3 that they've allowed me to set up. And we have, because of your support, we have now we've made enough in that fund that we were able to bring a group of geophysical folks in here. We're doing something that has never ever been done in North America before. We're using the same technologies that they're using over in Afghanistan and Ukraine and places like that. Those devices actually are sonar units, and they can do vertical and lateral probes. We have hooked it to a GPS unit, and then we have some certified drone operators. You probably know one of those guys, Jimmy Cardle, who's right here in Frankfort. And we have done physical mapping with structures above the ground, and we're mapping them to the grid that the sonar devices have found of things underneath the ground. And we're now building a grid, and we're also finding now headstones that have fallen down into these old wooden caskets. And now we're working to be able to raise those up without disturbing the bodies. So that's the next piece of this. But that's what's going on right now in Green Hill Cemetery. So if you've not heard about it, you're going to be hearing more and more about it. So it's going to be a major announcement because it has created an interest. And we've even had people flying in from Ireland, because remember, the Scottish and Irish came in here. So we've got families from all over Frankfort actually buried in the cemetery, and we're finding them, and we're actually going back and revisiting who they are and where they are, and getting other folks involved. This charming young man, if you've ever seen him walking around Frankfort, so that is Taylor Hay. And Taylor Hay is now the oldest living tailor in the country. And the guy next to him is Nick. He is our bourbon archaeologist. And so I periodically get with Taylor and we just chat. Now, why is this important? It's because, remember what I started with. And I told you back in the day, Colonel West had a couple of kids by the cook, Martha, all right? Well, we're going through and we start getting into old bourbons and whiskeys, and they're called Friends of the Trace. And my buddy over here, Michael, is sitting there, he's smiling, because something interesting happens. We do a lot of private tastings, and at one of these events, for Friends of the Trace, this particular person says, I've got some old whiskey. I would love to have Freddie walk me through how I should be tasting it. I mean, we're talking about some really good products. And he says, would you set that up for us so that he could come over to my house and walk me through it? So we're over there, and I meet this elderly guy, and we're sipping, and he's chatting with me, and we're talking about the different products. And he says, Freddie, this is just fascinating. He said, what a history. He said, gosh, and you know so much about bourbon and whiskey. He said, this is just wonderful. He said, but if you don't mind me asking, now he's got his Pappy 20 up to his lips. He's about to take a good sip of his Pappy 20. And he says, if you don't mind me asking, he said, do you happen to know who the plantation owner was that, you know, bothered the kids? And I was like, well, sure, it was Colonel West. And he just, and he looks at me. And then he says, Freddie, that's my family. I'm a West. So we have gone on a journey, and he actually, believe it or not, has put together a document on his family. And his family goes all the way back through history. And he shared that with me. And Hugh West and the West family's monumentous role in founding and developing Alexandria and Fairfax and Loudoun counties, Virginia. So all of a sudden, you go, whoa. Little did we know, over a good sip of hooch, that I would find the origin of my family. So I say this to say this. You will meet people every day that you walk this earth. You don't understand the significance of that encounter until you take the time to get to know them. So we got into a discussion, and one would think George is, what, 94 years old now? And so for me, I was taken aback when this elderly white guy, sitting there with a cane, I come up the steps in the visitor center, and in front of everybody, he gets up and he says, Cousin Freddie! And quite naturally, everybody thought it was a joke. You know? And then he immediately turns around and he says, no, he really is my cousin. And so all of a sudden, he was as proud of me as I was of him by openly acknowledging my family. And even though we couldn't control the past, we can make tomorrow a better place. So, as my dad is saying goodbye, I will say goodbye. I hope that you've enjoyed just walking down memory lane with me and understanding that it's more than just whiskey in a bottle. And we have someone else here who did something. I'm going to let Matt make a comment here. And there was a reason for it, because he had something, right?
Yes, I do. I brought you some. Sorry, y'all, this is on the spot.
I have known this gentleman for a minute, and wow, thank you for putting me on the spot. I brought Freddie a bottle of ancient age 10-year-old that we shared together with, I don't know, 8 other fellas a year or 2 ago, and I chromed it. So Lexington Bourbon Society is a nonprofit in Lexington, and I chromed it the other night. We had an event, and I thought I needed to chrome that and take it to this to give to you. So you want to, what do we want to do with it?
So I would like to present it to Osiris.
Let's do that.
So we only have a couple of bottles that were handled by my dad that we are aware of. So that is the significance of this particular one. Okay. Yeah, I'll later.
Yeah, that's ancient age 10 years. So this was a bottle that we shared with Freddie and some friends, and again, our little group, who's a nonprofit, got together and chromed it up. So how nice is it to be able to do that?
Cool beans. Osiris?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Okay. And the other person I'm going to put on the spot is Michael. Come here. So my first encounter with Michael was, there was this guy, and every time we looked around, click, click. And all of a sudden I looked and I said, oh my God, here comes this guy again with that camera. Click, 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 click. But he started capturing things that I didn't even think were significant. And so it's amazing how that relationship developed. And all of a sudden, he knows the guy who is the guy that is my family's guy. And I'm going like, what are the odds of that happening?
Very good.
But anyway, but I just wanted to formally say thank you to Michael, because they're called kids and shits in life. And he could have blown it off, but he persisted. And he did the should. He did the right thing instead of just shutting it down. So,
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much.
So at the same time that this is going on, and we've got the 501c3 set up for historical, it's not just for Green Hill Cemetery. We're actually doing this for, it's set up that I can do any historical site that I choose, anywhere in North America. So, but we're focusing on Kentucky right now. I'm focusing on Green Hill Cemetery because the objective is, if you've heard me talk about this before, my objective is to have people visit Buffalo Trace Distillery. They can leave the distillery. 5 minutes away is Green Hill Cemetery. They visit Green Hill Cemetery. It's a historical site now. They can bring it up. They can actually going to be able to go in with their phones, punch in numbers. We're embedding these plates into the ground with numbers on them. Those numbers correspond with whoever's buried in that site. And they will be able to find out if they've got family, but they can visit that historical site. Go right down the road, hit Frankfort Cemetery, and visit Daniel Boone's grave and the folks that are buried there. Go right down a little bit further and hit the Arsenal. Hang out there for a little bit. Go right down the hill, and they can hit the Capital City Museum and the Clark Museum. But they can stay right here in Frankfort and spend a couple of days. So my objective is to create a loop and keep people right in and around Frankfort, which enhances the business and the retail shops because we're focused on the downtown area. And that's one of the problems that we have right now is people come in, they visit one place and they leave. And the objective is to create something that is something that we can all be proud of in Frankfort. But it takes time. But I just wanted you to know that we're doing that. And the second thing that we're doing is we had mentioned, Matt had mentioned the Lexington Bourbon Society. There's also another one called the Kentucky Black Bourbon Guild. Very few people know about it. But that one also has a scholarship fund. It's called the Freddie Scholarship Fund. And we do barrel selections, and a portion of those proceeds goes to scholarships for kids. And we've already funded 10 kids with scholarships. So on behalf of our family, and Osiris, I won't put him on the spot, but I just wanted to personally say thank you for taking the time to come out and spend time with us. And I do hope that you feel like your time was value added. But I just always say, we all walk this earth with baggage. We grow up with it. The deal is, when we meet someone, we have to decide, how is that baggage going to affect how I interact with the person? And do I let the baggage block me from maybe creating a new friend or a new relationship? Or maybe it can help us be a better person. So that's why I tell you this. If you have a good bottle of bourbon, share it. Thank you.
And we're going to actually take about 15 minutes of Q&A if you will like. And Diane can get another microphone here and pass it around the room. So, and then Freddie's got a door prize.
Yes.
Yeah,
You want to
okay.
tell them about your door prize so they can put their name in the pot if they have it?
Yeah, and we've got another person, another little bird in here. So where Todd goes, Todd's sitting back there. He doesn't say very much, but Todd's on the Capital City Museum board with me, and he's also helping me with a lot of the archives things that we're doing around here, finding historical sites and how they all fit together. And we've got a number of people out here that I've encountered and done things with. I met Nash Cox. I ran into her out there, and she was telling me she had her mask on and she'd been exposed to some COVID stuff, and so she didn't want to make anybody else sick, and it was kind of interesting, but I would have never thought she would have done that. And she waited outside just so that she could chat for a little bit. So it tells you a little bit about Frankfort, and we just don't talk about how good Frankfort is, but it's a pretty cool place. Now, back in the back, we got a couple of interesting things back there. So there's a couple of magazines. One is when the Freddie Soda rolled out. Fella, I think that was one that we did on the history of my family and the soda and how the Freddie's Root Beer all came about. So I've actually signed that magazine, and I also have the one that was recently done, inducted me into the International Whiskey Hall of Fame. So those two, there are very few of those that I think even in Frankfort are in this area, but I've signed those two, and I have a Rubik's Cube as a fun one. But those three, which is the Freddie Soda thing. The deal is, we have put, if you wanted, the names are in the bowl, right? So John, are you going to reach in the bowl?
Well, a lot of people didn't.
Yes, we're going to give them a little chance
Oh,
if they
wait.
haven't, while we ask questions.
So
Is that okay?
Leslie said, my name's not in there.
Yeah, we want to give everybody a fair chance.
Yeah, all right. So why don't we take a few
Yeah, let's start taking questions.
You haven't
If you
had-
have a question, will you raise your hand? I'm going to bring you the mic.
Okay.
Everybody wants to get in that drawing.
Yeah. But it's a cool story.
So Freddie, good to see you again. So my question is, with the change in the bourbon world as it stands today, what do you think your father would think of it, where it is today, to what he saw through the tough times?
When they started rolling out the barrels faster and faster, he shook his head and he said, who would have ever thought that this old distillery would be where it is today? And I actually was doing a tour with the owner of the distillery, and he was taking pictures. And I asked him about it. He says, we had no earthly idea of the treasure that we had right here. I think that my dad and my granddad and Elmer and all of them would be blown away at the number of people that come to Frankfort each day just to see the distillery. A lot of them don't even drink. And they just come there and walk around, and they'll take some of the soda, or they'll just do, get something from the gift shop. But they are fascinated with what that distillery is actually doing right now. And it's actually a beautiful place to come visit. So he'd like, I don't think that. He said, I don't know, I'll have to drink more, because they're making a lot of it now. So, but yeah, it's kind of crazy. That's a good one. That's a good one. I hope that they are as pleased as and happy with what we've done to maintain the integrity of everything. But yeah, I'm sure they're just looking down, smiling at us right now. I will tell you this, while we're getting these names finished up, I want to show you how crazy all this is. So that barrel that my dad's leaning on, the crazy part about this industry is you make stuff that you'll never live to taste. Now watch this, fast forward. This guy from Michigan comes in here with his 2 sons, and they like the root beer, and we do a tour, and we have some fun, and they go away. I had no earthly idea who this guy was. He's very, very affluent, all right? And I get a phone call one day, and he says, Freddie? And I said, yeah. He said, what are you doing Saturday morning? I said, beg your pardon? He said, what are you doing Saturday morning? I said, I don't know, what's up? He said, well, we're coming down from Michigan, and we would love it if you would meet us at the Sunset Memorial gravesite. I said, I beg your pardon? He said, isn't that where your dad's buried? And I said, yeah. He said, we want to meet you there at your dad's gravesite. Okay. And I'm thinking, what is this about? Well, those millionth barrels, they basically bottled them, and they put them in a little presentation package, and they auctioned them off to nonprofits. And the 6 millionth barrel raised over $1 million for nonprofits. This guy had gotten one of those bottles. The package, my dad's picture, the little story about it, the whole shebang, little wooden box, I mean the whole thing. I meet them, we go to Dad's gravesite, and he pulls out 5 glasses. And I'm like, what's this about? He opens it up. He says, I remember what you said about these old guys never get a chance to taste the final product. He said, so a bunch of us got together, and we decided we're going to bring this bottle down here. We're going to open it up, and we're going to do a pour together in honor of your dad. I'm like, okay. And I said, we got an extra glass. He said, no, we don't. He said, you're going to pour some in it, and when we raise our glass and do our toast, you will then, as you consume yours, you're going to pour this on your dad's gravesite. Cool. He says, just so that he gets a chance to taste it. They sign the bottle. He gives it to me. He would never tell me how much he paid for it. He gives it to me, and he says, I want you to share this with... So, fast forward. Now I've got this really nice pan. I'm like, oh, gee, this is kind of cool. So I called my daughter up, and I said, Christy, I said, I got this special bottle, and I said, it's from the 6 million barrel that Dad handled and everything. And I said, how about if, we get together and do a little toast? And she said, now wait a minute, I thought you said you were going to save this stuff until he's 21. And I said, I hope there are no legal people. So here's what happened. So I said, okay. I said, all right, we're going to do a toast. And she said, well, what's this about? I said, well, I wanted to save it until he was 21. I said, but looking at the world and the way things happen today, who's to say I will even be around when he's 21? I said, so I figure if we do a toast now, just a little one, and then we date the bottle, if I am around when he's 21, we can then go back and laugh about how when he was only 16, we did this toast from this bottle. I said, but if I'm not around, he's got a cool story to tell his friends about how at this point in his life, he was able to share something with his papa. So I just tell folks all the time, there will always be more whiskey. Friends and family and special moments don't happen every day. So if you're blessed enough to have a good pour, make a memory, and hopefully everybody's got their name back there.
We got some more questions first.
Oh.
I was just wondering how many people come through in a year to the distillery?
Are you ready for this? They thought, when this thing first got started, they said, well, I'll tell you what, if we can get 500,000 visitors to visit Buffalo Trace in a year by 2025, we would have met our expectation. You ready for this? Last year, they had over 660,000 visitors to come to Buffalo Trace. And it's growing at a rate of 12 to 15% per year on-premise visits. So we've already exceeded that. So that's why we keep expanding. And so that's why the Taylor tour, when we go back by Pompeii, we call it Pompeii, where we're going to make that into another visitor center experience area. But then they uncovered Taylor's original distillery. So now they've got to redo the plan, and they're still going to try to do that, but now we've got to figure out how do we get all these people in. So if you ever wondered about those lines and the vans that we give you and stuff like that, it's because we have a limit on how many people we can have in any one building because of fire codes. So we're constantly moving people around and doing all this, but yeah, so it's exceeded expectations, and at the same time, the problem is you have to look at the mix. It used to be it was an old guy's drink. Now we got, I did a tour, it was the great-grandfather, the grandfather, the father, the son, and you might as well say the Holy Ghost. Father, son, they were all there. And they had their significant others, and they all like bourbon. So this explosion that we were just talking about a moment ago, no one had thought that this would ever happen. So even though all these distilleries are making all this product, they still got to let it age. So you can't rush Mother Nature, you can't cheat Father Time. So that's why I said, hopefully at one point we'll be good to go. Yes, sir. I know you.
Yes. My dad and your dad worked together. Tell us about the root beer and how that came about.
So it's an interesting story. So what actually happened was my final commute was out of Atlanta, but I worked out of New York. I was part of AT&T's Network Control Center group. And we did underground military sites, Air Force One. I had a top secret security clearance. But my commute when I was in that area was, I lived in New Jersey, but I had to commute into New York. It's called The Path. It's out of Hoboken, New Jersey. And what happened was, I'm back here with my dad, and they were like, man, have y'all seen what's going on up in New York? I'm like, no. They said, you need to go turn on TV. We turn on TV, the planes are flying into the World Trade Center. So my dad and I have a meltdown. And what happened was, I was keeping a promise to my dad that I would be his caregiver and I would take care of him. He found out he was terminally ill, and he called me up and asked me would I come home to be his caregiver. And the way that AT&T had worked out this arrangement with me, as long as my meetings were not in Atlanta or New York, I could work remotely. But if any of my meetings or sessions were in either of those two locations, I had to get there on my own. Okay? But it allowed me to be with my dad. So in the midst of all this, planes are flying in the World Trade Center, and 5 minutes to 9 on 9/11, I would have been dead. So nobody really understood all of that, and then they found out what was going on, hence the Freddie's root beer. That's how that came about. They did it as a way of saying, you did good. So I played at Buffalo Trace Distillery as a kid, and they inherited this root beer called McGillicuddy's root beer. It was made in Cold Springs, Minnesota, at the Gluck Brewery. And they made that root beer during Prohibition. When they did a merger with the McGillicuddy products, they got a root beer that the name didn't match anything associated with the distillery. So they were like, well, hey, Freddie, you played here as a kid. How about we name the root beer after you? And I'm like, well, is it going to be any good? You know, and they said, oh, yeah. And so it's called a clean label. But it's real oil of birch. The vanilla is imported in from Madagascar. Real cane sugar. This is part of the tasting panel over here that did final approval. So my grandkids were involved in that. But that's how it came about. It was a way of the family and Mark Brown and all of them just recognizing my contribution in a way that I don't get any money for it, but it's a way of giving back and acknowledging being a good person. Coulds and shoulds. Cool, thank you.
We have one more question. Anybody? Oh, right back here in the back. Hold on just a second.
You may have told us, and if I missed it, I'm sorry. I've got family buried in Green Hill Cemetery too. So are you all putting that information on a site, did you say, or you're getting ready to after you compile it, or?
Yeah, so here, all right, so her question is, you could hear it. So her question is, where's that information? Who's buried where? So it started off, I thought it was a pretty simple project. Okay, so they had estimated, when we did the walkabout, they had estimated that maybe about 1,500 bodies up there. We did the reshoot, there's over 5,000 bodies buried up there. And so now we're trying to figure out how do we load all this stuff, because it's a very big database. And what we're trying to do is get the universities involved and let the students that are doing things in history and stuff like that load that information into this grid. And that way it'll actually, they get credit for doing it, but it also cuts down on the cost of having contracted with somebody to do that for us. But yeah, so that's what we're working on right now, and it's just like what you said, more and more families are realizing they've got family up there, but they didn't really know how to go about getting the information, who's got it, and we just keep finding stuff. But yeah, you're going to hear more about that, and we'd love to talk to you about it. If you know about the Mormons actually volunteer. They've done it. I think this is the third time. And if you wonder about all that Russian debris that showed up, and all of a sudden the cemetery is nice and clean up there, they actually volunteer and come in and help us do that. That's not the city. So the city basically gives enough money to cut the grass. That's all that's going on there. All this other stuff that we're doing is individual contributions and the Freddie Sober. That's how we do it. Cool. So yeah, so you're going to hear more from us on what we're doing up there. All right, Diane, are we ready? Uh-oh.
I'm nervous. I'm excited.
I see another charming young man back there. Yeah, Richard, I was telling him, I said, I'm going to be like Richard. I said, I'm going to try to get out of here and get done. And I was looking at the clock and all that. And here we are, Richard. It's a trap, isn't it? It's a trap.
See what we got. Ready? So let's draw first for this really cool Freddie's Root Beer Rubik's Cube, a collector's item. This is cool. I can never solve a Rubik's Cube, but maybe you could, so. Rusty Reichenbach. Rusty, where are you?
Wait a minute. This is Mark. Come here, brother. Come here. Y'all got to see this.
He has on a Freddie Soda shirt. Look at him.
Look at his T-shirt. Who would ever thought this?
All right, which one should we do first?
So,
We'll do this one first. You want to tell them what that is?
okay. So this one, it tells a little bit about, not only about whiskey, and I'm sure you've heard a little bit about Angel's Envy and what happened there. So Wes Henderson just recently sold Angel's Envy, and he purchased the castle over next to Kingman. And he's actually just announced he's going to make a distillery there and do a bunch of other stuff there in Kingman. So Angel's Envy, a lot of stuff in here. Talks a little bit about the grain, we got some cool recipes, and this is the Rotulas. So this one, I've actually signed it, but it's really kind of a cool one because the creator of Minters, he was inducted with me. So Joseph and I have kept up with each other, like Cork and the rest of them. But the first drawing is for this. There are only a few of these. The editor of American Whiskey Magazine, he found out that I do stuff like this, and he says, we're going to help you. So these things, normally I was just telling Diane, I said, normally you do something like this, and they said, well, we got some books back here with some, I don't like to do that. I don't like to feel like I'm trying to get you here to get something from me. I'm trying to give back. So if you'd like to do this, the first drawing is going to be for the magazine. I've signed it. If you want, I can personalize it, but some people like to not have them signed, basically. Sorry.
All right, Aubrey Washington. Aubrey? Yay, congrats.
Thank you very much.
One more.
And so this is, this one's pretty cool. This one's near and dear to my heart. So, but this is when they announced about the Freddie Soda and what I was doing with Freddie Soda. It's a real nice article in and about what we've been doing here in Kentucky. So, you ready?
Kentucky Monthly? Okay. All right. Put your in there. It's blank. I guess we'll draw again.
That was the spirit.
It was.
That was the spirit.
Michael Kearney. Michael. There you
Whoa!
go.
I'm telling you, this is the crazy world we live in. Okay, I'm letting her take a picture. All right? Now, you tell the story. Come here. Tell how
Here.
Michael ended up here.
Have a mic so we can hear you. There you go.
I kind of dragged him here a little bit. Well, not exactly, but maybe 10 years ago, I went on a tour at Buffalo Trace, and that was the first bourbon tour I had ever been on. And Freddie was a tour guide, and he left an impression. And so when we saw he was here today, I knew I had to come and listen to him speak.
Thank you. And we don't know, right? So it's meant to be.
Thank you so much, Freddie. Let's give him another round of applause. We appreciate you coming out and sharing your Saturday with us. I hope you'll come back and see us soon. I'm going to let John make a quick little announcement here.
All right, thank you all for coming again. I do want to let you know that our next speaker is the second speaker of the former Frankfort Heritage Press, Jim Pritchard, who will be talking about his book, Embattled Capital, Frankfort During the Civil War. So I want to make sure everybody knows about that. It'll be a treasured speaker as well. So thank you all. Have a great day.